Right, we can begin recording. We do have a couple of people who may be joining a few minutes late, but I don't want for us to delay the meeting any longer. We have a full conversation scheduled to be held this morning, and so we want to start to dig right in. There's lots of content to go through. So it is 10:03 on January 20th, 2022. Welcome to the Interstate Bridge Replacement Executive Steering Group Committee, Executive Steering Group meeting. We're pleased that you've joined us. We are in a virtual environment using Zoom as the tool, and we look forward to engaging you in a meaningful conversation. I'll start by saying Happy New Year. I recognize that it's January 20th, and we have already progressed through the month a significant amount. For some of us, referencing Commissioner Hardesty's earlier statement, it may feel like March already, but it is only January 20th. And so we're excited about starting off the year with a conversation about how we're going to advance the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. I'm going to provide for you some instructions about how we're going to go through this meeting. So for those of you who need to use closed captions, the closed captions are available in English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window, and the link is https://ibr.news/captions. Next slide. Additional information about how to access closed captions. Number one, at the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. Click on the CC icon, and a separate window with captions will appear. We have some participation tips for you today. We'd like to thank you for joining us, and we encourage panelists to turn on your video. Please keep your audio on mute when you're not speaking, and before speaking, please state your name and affiliation to help attendees identify who is talking. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at, if you could go back to the last slide so I could read that number. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. Public input instructions. There will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. To submit input after the meeting, email comments to info@interstatebridge.org. That's info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line. Or you can call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. So we will now go around the virtual table and have introductions from our program partners with brief updates. And then we will have a welcome from our program administrator. We are looking forward to the meeting, as I've shared, and we will be getting started right now. So Greg, do you want to kick us off, or would you like for me to start with our program partners? Excuse me, Administrator Johnson.
Why don't we go around with our partners, and then I'll dive in afterwards.
Sounds good. So we'll start with our alternate from the office of the Oregon Department of Transportation, Brendan Finn, who is the Office of Urban Mobility Director. Brendan.
Thanks, Millicent. Good morning, everybody. Best wishes from Director Strickler. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today because of the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting. We don't have any reports here, but look forward to diving into the work. So back to you, Millicent.
Thanks so much, Brendan. Our next ESG member is Secretary Roger Millar, who is the Secretary for the Washington State Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Millicent, and good morning, everyone. I am pleased that it will not be snowing in the mountains this weekend. And other than that, we're ready to get to work. So good morning. It's great to see everybody.
Thank you so much, Secretary Millar. Next, from the City of Portland, we'd like to hear from Commissioner Joanne Hardesty.
Good morning. Happy New Year, everyone. And that's all I got.
Seems like everybody's ready to dig in. All right, so from the City of Vancouver, Mayor Ann McInerney-Ogle.
Good morning, everyone. Joanne Hardesty and I had the great pleasure of listening to Representative Blumenauer this morning at JPAC, and the I-5 bridge is a priority for him. And then Senator Murray's new assistant, Amanda, in charge of transportation, sends her best, and the senator's ready to rock and roll and help us with our I-5 bridge project.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Mayor Ann. From the RTC, we will hear from Executive Director Matt Ransom.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you all. And yeah, at RTC, we've been spending quite a bit of time in the last couple of months unpacking the Infrastructure and Investment Job Act. That's the new federal transportation bill. And the more I read it, the more impressive it is in terms of its not only scope, but really how many opportunities may exist within that federal bill for funding components of this project. And I say components relative to both the bridge, the highway, as well as many of the other community type improvements that I think the project outcome can deliver: active transportation, just, accessibility, safety, et cetera. So for those that are not familiar with the bill, I'd certainly encourage you to take a peek at it. It's broad in scope, but also I think just really a true opportunity for this region. So the question for all of us would be, do we seize it? I think we can. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. We're pleased that Metro Council President Lynn Peterson is with us. President Peterson.
Good morning. Thanks, everyone. Just a quick update. You know that the Metro Council considered, I can't remember, it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, values, outcomes, and action document for the I-5 bridge replacement program. And that document really was a reflection of what the Metro Council expects from the project and the actions that we are requesting from the IBR team in order to achieve those outcomes. The council really came together with one voice in requesting that the IBRP project demonstrate how the values are being advanced by the project. And I'll just go through those values quickly with you. Just, they are there's a lot of overlap between the project itself and these values, but they were addressing racial equity, resiliency and economic prosperity, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving air quality, and engaging stakeholders through a transparent and inclusionary decision-making process. And so I'm very proud that we were able to pull that together, and very appreciative of the work that the project will be doing to help us answer these questions.
Thanks so much. Next, we will hear from the CEO of CTRAN, Sean Donahue.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Not really too much to report here. We'll just share Mayor McInerney-Ogle's comments about JPAC this morning. One thing that I thought came out of JPAC that caught our attention was the praise for the bus on shoulder project that SMART's currently running down in that area. We always like to have another regional partner that runs an amazing bus on shoulder program, and I think it speaks volumes of the success that it could have in conjunction with other modes of transportation on the I-5 bridge. So I really appreciated those comments this morning at JPAC to hear about the success of that project. So other than that, big thanks to the team. I know there's been a lot of hard work going into a lot of discussions, so I'm always thankful for the work being done there.
Thank you so much, Sean. Now we're excited to hear from the Port of Portland, Kristen Leonard.
Good morning. Not a lot to report, but just look forward to continuing all of this great work that everyone's been doing, and want to thank you to the staff and the team for continuing to lean in on all of us as we proceeded through the holidays. So good morning.
Thank you so much. And from the Port of Vancouver, Commissioner Jack Berkman.
Good morning, everyone. Just like Kristen said, really appreciate the work that's going on. I appreciate the authentic community engagement, that commitment to engage the freight community, and the transparent data-driven approach. We're really looking forward to seeing the full results of all the analyses, especially as they relate to the freight movement.
Thanks, Commissioner. And from the Community Advisory Group, one of our co-chairs, Lynn Valenter.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I don't typically report, but I do just want to do a kind of touch point that says that the Community Advisory Group remains fully engaged. We've had really excellent attendance since at our most recent meeting, just really sustained interest and effort. We had an opportunity to route the community survey links both for our participants as well as to their communities. And I think that was an extremely effective approach that allowed voices to be heard both from the CAG itself as well as their communities that in many cases they're representing a variety of communities. I also would just say that the CAG is super excited to be able to look at specific alternatives and be able to understand and weigh in on what the choices are that we can help to influence. So we're entering a very busy time, but we're excited and ready to be engaged. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much. I will mention that we do not have at this point in the meeting representatives from TriMet or the other co-chair, Ed Washington, for the CAG. So I just wanted to acknowledge that they are not currently participants in the meeting. Should they join, we will give them the opportunity to provide an update or any inputs that they would like to share. And for the record, the representative from TriMet is the Engineering and Construction Director, Steve Witter. So with that, we will hand it over to Administrator Johnson.
Once again, I'd like to echo the Happy New Year's to everyone. This is, we have been meeting now for 14 months with this group. And I think we have come a long way from those first meetings. We have accomplished a lot in this last year. You're going to see some of the accomplishments later in the presentation of what the program has done and completed over these last 14, 15 months. So I'd also like to thank the Metro Council and President Peterson. It was a long, robust meeting, but ultimately was successful to continue the funding for the program. So thanks for all of the efforts that went into that. And please know that we are committed to getting the answers and coming back to Metro Council with all of the things that have been put on the table for the IBR team. So that is something that we look forward to, and it's things that we have been working on throughout. So no big surprises. So, but thank you, and that was a very confirming vote to say, yeah, we need to answer the questions that are still out there for the program. So once again, the team has been extremely busy. A lot of folks worked right through the holiday period, putting things together. So we have our bi-state meeting next Monday. It's going to be a late meeting to accommodate some of the schedules as session is starting in both legislatures. So we are looking forward to having that conversation. And as part of their request, they requested that that we invite different members from different groups to come before them so they can ask questions. So this first go round, we will have both Matt Ransom and President Peterson coming before bi-state to entertain questions or share concerns that they may have with the program. But eventually, a number of ESG members will be on that docket to have their voice heard in that bi-state setting. So we are also over, since our last meeting, we got word from our federal partners that they have done the reevaluation of where we are at for our next steps. And so as we are looking towards these next 5 to 6 months as a critical time frame internally to for ESG members, for the communities to give feedback so we can get going on to the next steps. We'll be looking for endorsements from ESG to move forward, as well as bi-state. So, but we heard from our federal partners that once we do have that step completed, then we will be able to proceed into the supplemental environmental impact statement process. And that is a key step in the NEPA process. It is the most stringent of requirements to answer the questions, to look at impacts, and to make sure that the public has had their say, all of the partners have had their say. So we will be diving into that process upon getting the endorsements from this body, as well as the bi-state legislative group to move forward. So we're still working tremendously hard, running models. The data gathering is done. Now it's data sorting and data input into the models. So that is an ongoing process. We're hoping within the next month and a half to 2 months to start taking the results of those models and start putting the IBR solution or the locally preferred alternative, the draft locally preferred alternative, on the table for this group and our advisory groups to start looking at and giving us feedback. So we will be ready to go before boards and councils starting more than likely in April, running through April, May, and early June, and then be ready to tee it up for ESG to give us the endorsement to move forward. So one of the key things that also happened, and this just happened last week, and hopefully everybody heard the message from the president on infrastructure, but he specifically mentioned the I-5 bridge over the Columbia River as a national priority. So once again, that put wind in our sails, because we are being recognized as a critical piece of national infrastructure moving forward. So this is important to know that we are being recognized on that national level, especially as we go into putting forward our grant applications to bring dollars to this program. What other things? We've been meeting. We have a critical meeting coming up in about a week and a half with our federal partners, both Federal Transit Administration and Federal Highway Administration, to give them the latest updates of where we're at and just check in with them to make sure that they are comfortable with the direction that everything is going in. So they will be coming down to the Portland, Vancouver area. We haven't set the final location yet, but we will be meeting with the regional leadership from both entities to talk about the program and where we are at. So we've been doing meetings around the region. I just had 3 meetings with 3 different communities in Southwest Washington. We're going to be repeating those type of informational meetings in Oregon as well, to bring that second tier of partners up to speed of where we're at. Because once again, it's important that this is not just looked at as a local project, but also a regional and a statewide program that impacts a lot of different lives in a lot of different communities. So those conversations have gone well. We had some great questions. Last night we presented to the city of Battleground and had some great questions from the mayor and the former mayor and their city manager. So those type of conversations are ongoing. So everyone in the region feels the impact of what this program can and should be doing for their communities. So with that, I will I'll stop and I'll take any questions or concerns you have before we dive into the meat of the presentations.
I see that Mayor Ann has unmuted herself. You have a question or comment?
Greg, you've also been working on some 3-dimensional visuals to share. So I'm wondering, can we take a look at some of those? I know they're pretty high level design options, but I think it's important that we have the opportunity to kind of start looking and getting a feel about how some of these designs integrate with our water, our land, our entire, our landscape and our community.
Well, and we can pull up,
Okay.
I think we have 2 slides that show 3D renderings. So, and as you can see, and I will walk you through this, but hopefully my team is on point to kick me under the table where I go wrong.
Brad is on the call. He is available to answer additional questions or provide additional insights if you need for him to.
So instead of me stumbling through it, Brad, why don't I ask you to walk the executive steering group through what they are looking at.
And Brad, when you turn your camera on, could you please state your name and your role in the program?
Hey, good morning. I'm Brad Phillips. I'm the civil design lead for the program. I really wanted you to try to stumble through this, Greg. Kind of disappointed. We have examples of 2 of our design options. The design options are focused on differences over the Columbia River, which is on the top right side of the screen. This particular option shows a 2-bridge option where the vehicle lanes are on the top level of the structure. Southbound is on the right, northbound is on the left in this view. And transit is shown underneath the structure. In this version, it's a gold color. On the far side, there's a purple color. It's labeled shared use path ramp. And so that is the bridge, one of the bridge configurations. This particular view from transit perspective shows one option of the transit adjacent to I-5. There's another option that's not shown in this view that goes towards Washington Street into downtown Vancouver. And as one studies and takes more time to study, you can see the different ramp configurations accessing between SR14 and I-5 and between the corridors and into downtown Vancouver. So this is the 2-bridge option. And another example is a 1-bridge option. Not sharing the other one?
Oh.
There it is. Okay. This is the 1-bridge option. You can see it's a narrower corridor over the Columbia River, except vehicle lanes on the southbound direction are on the top of the structure. Northbound is on the bottom of the structure, again, showing the same transit adjacent to I-5 with the optional transit going to downtown. The ramp configurations are similar in this configuration to the two bridge option. And again, showing the shared use path connection between the bridge and downtown, or down to the Vancouver waterfront in the background of this photo. So this is an example of the direction we're going with our designs, showing the downtown Vancouver area. We are currently working on similar visuals for the remainder of the corridor, especially concentrations on what it's going to look like in the Hayden Island and Marine Drive area for the different bridge configurations over there, as well as the interchange options that we are looking at.
So Brad, thank you very much for that. And these options are still in the talking stages. So, but getting these out here are important for folks to start looking at what some visualizations of this program, of this corridor, can look like. We've used this to, or a version of this, to talk to the Cowlitz tribe, to show them the impacts that would be near Fort Vancouver, which they have a very vested interest in. So we've been talking to Fort Vancouver and to all of the resource partners about what this could possibly look like and what some of those impacts would be. So this is, yeah, go right ahead, Mayor.
No, I'm sorry, but do we have anything that shows more transit or anything like those yet?
And I'll ask Brad to answer that question if we have anything beyond this this stretch of showing.
We have modeled all of the options on the downtown Vancouver area. Those versions that we just showed are slightly outdated. So we have some versions that show the different transit options that I was trying to describe towards downtown versus transit adjacent to I-5. But the models that we have now cover between approximately Evergreen and the waterfront of Vancouver.
Oh, great. Can we see them, or do we have them available?
Can I share my screen?
We'll give you sharing access. Brad, give us just a moment while Kim is doing that. Commissioner Hardesty, I saw that your hand was raised.
Yes, my hand was raised for a much earlier conversation. So I was just going to kind of wait until we were done with this. But my question was, Greg was talking about these meetings coming up in a week and a half. And I want to know what elected officials he's taking with him to these meetings.
So these are technical meetings with Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Authority. So we don't have any elected officials invited at this point.
How are we going to, I guess, Greg, for me, I'm concerned that we continue to have meetings and we're developing options, and we're doing it in isolation of the decision makers who will have to make the decision about the design. So I ask this question a lot, and I guess my question still becomes, how are you going to engage the elected leaders who will have to lead this effort through their elected bodies?
So the meeting that we have is not a developing alternative meeting. It is to update our federal partners on all of the activities that we have done with groups like the Executive Steering Group, with Bi-State Ledge. We are, I have no concerns about having elected officials interacting with our federal partners. Most of this is technical, looking at timelines, schedules, to make sure we don't put ourselves outside of the window for meeting certain federal guidelines and funding windows. But we can create those type of opportunities at the pleasure of the Executive Steering Group with Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Authority.
I think we
Generally, these
have
have
to.
been-
I think we need to figure out what that looks like and what's the appropriate time for us to weigh in, right? My concern is that while we're having these technical meetings, there are designs being developed and talked about and weighed with our federal partners without our input. And that's not a good thing.
So the input that we're taking to them is input that we have done with the staff members from each of the partners. So these are things that City of Portland, City of Vancouver, all of these staff, technical staff members have been involved in these conversations, and they're not seeing anything new that you have not seen nor heard. So they are coming on the, I would say, second end of this discussion, not on the front end of it. But we can talk some more about those type of opportunities for that interaction. So no concerns from our standpoint.
Thanks, Commissioner Hardesty. And we've made a note of that to ensure that we don't fail to incorporate the voices of elected officials at the most appropriate times as we're engaging with FTA and FHWA. Brad, you have control or the ability now to share.
Okay. What happened to it? Okay, this is the updated version. So this is showing the two different transit options. This is
No,
We're
I
not
don't see
seeing
anything,
anything.
Brad.
If you think you're showing us something, you're
Oh,
not.
It disappeared
sorry,
again.
disappeared.
There we go.
Okay. After 2 years, you'd think we know this program. This is a slightly different viewpoint than the one I was showing. So this is looking towards the north. The Columbia River's on the bottom. Same interchange configuration, but this shows the two different transit alignments in the pink going towards downtown with the Washington Street transit option, and in the gold color continuing up I-5 with the high capacity transit adjacent to I-5. Evergreen is up at the top of the page. So this is a different view. And then the shared use path, this is a representation of the vertical that would be required to get from underneath the structure down to the waterfront and connecting to the Renaissance Trail. So that is that side by side, the two bridge option, and then the one bridge option. Again, transit options to Washington or adjacent, the interchange, and the shared use path.
Can you explain the difference between the two bridge and one bridge options? Just looks skinnier for me right at the moment. What's the big difference in the two?
I go back to the two bridge option. This has the vehicles on top. So northbound and southbound directions of I-5 are adjacent to each other on the top of the structure. Underneath is the shared use path and the transit. So you don't see those because they're down underneath the vehicle bridge. In the shared use path, or in the stacked version, vehicles are on top of vehicles. So in this case, the southbound vehicles are on top of northbound. You look at this 3D view, you can see the northbound coming out from under the southbound. So that's why it's narrower. But off to the side is now you can see the transit because it's off to the side of the structure as well as the shared use path. So the transit and the shared use path kind of hang out to the side a little bit of the vehicles that are stacked over the top of each other.
And does that really mean we'd be building two bridges instead of one?
This is a one bridge solution because they're on top of each other. And this other version is 2 separate bridges with a gap in the middle.
And just for the record, that was the configuration from the last LPA, correct?
This 2 bridge is the solution from the previous LPA. Yes.
So Brad, you probably have it on here, but I'm working off an iPad and I have a tiny screen. Please make sure on every graphic that you might have that there's a date so that we can always have a reference to it, and perhaps a compass rose for those individuals who need to have directions. But Greg, thank you so very much. These 3-dimensional visuals will really help us as we have this conversation about the landscape and our community and such. I know that the moment this is shared, the Columbian newspaper, Clark County Today, social media, and everybody else is going to want to publish all of this information. We know it's very high level. We know it's conceptual. We want to make sure that it doesn't represent any decisions that are being made, that we are working towards that process and getting that done, and that more visuals will be available, as Brad said, and as you said, actually going over the river, and then of course the Portland side. But thank you so very much for sharing that. That is going to help a lot of people understand what we're working on.
Okay. You're very
And if I
welcome.
could just add on to what the mayor said. Oh, Greg, go ahead and say thank you to the mayor before I jump.
Yeah, just wanted to thank her. And, you know, as we were looking at these alternatives, the impacts to downtown Vancouver, because of the closeness of this facility, is tremendously important. So I just wanted to thank you for your staff and the time they've put in helping look at what options are realistic for the city of Vancouver. So thank you.
You bet. You bet.
If I could add one more suggestion, I think it would be really helpful in a slide deck to actually have a picture of what was proposed the first go round, because I would like to actually stop having the conversation. We already have a plan, right? We either, right, that we've made a decision. And so a visual that just kind of showed this was what was proposed last time. This is how it's changed now. These are the options that we're considering as we continue to move this process forward. I think many people get stuck in the decision has already been made, right? And no matter how many times we say we have made no decisions on this project, we're trying to keep a timeline that's consistent with the goals that we've laid out, but we have made no decision at all on what the design outcomes will be. And I think your material should help us tell that story, right? So if you're doing these visuals, please do the visuals from the first go round, because people still feel from that go round. And then whatever visuals we're going to be responding to from this go round. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Commissioner Hardesty.
and I
we have
will
a
lean
hand
on
raised,
Brad
I'm
to
sorry.
tell us how we can get that done, but we will work on that to show where we've been and where we're.
And it doesn't have to be detailed. I'm just talking about the pictures, because I think the pictures tell 1,000 words, right? So it doesn't even have to be detailed. It just could be like a summary, right? With the visuals about where we thought we were going. Because it's going to help me. Let me just speak from a me perspective. It will help me as I'm actually sharing with my colleagues why it's important for them to vote on whatever I present to them, right? Because they're hearing, just like we are from everybody, about, oh, you just pulled it off the shelf and you're just running to the goal line, right? So it will help us significantly as we start getting to those points where we're making decisions with our local governments. Thank you.
Okay.
I see Commissioner Berkman's hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. I completely agree with what Joanne and Ann are talking about. These are going to get legs really fast through the community. It's at first fairly easy to look at and start to understand visuals. Ann mentioned adding the date and a compass rose. I would also ask that you add a disclaimer of some kind that clarifies if these are draft, they are not, done right now, something so that if somebody pulls one of these slides out of a packet, that they stand alone with clarity that these are early looks.
Thank you, Commissioner Berkman. I will share that the communications team has discussed, first of all, the fact that once images like this get shared, there will be the opportunity for people to develop a narrative, and we're working to manage that, making direct contact with media outlets to ensure that they have the accurate information and are clear about what these images represent. Additionally, we have asked that disclaimers, drafts, watermarks, all the things that could make sure that folks know that this is not final, this is concept, are things that are going to be placed on any of the images that would be made available through any means. We recognize that there is the possibility that someone might have taken a screenshot of what we just shared. And so hopefully we can manage that messaging as well. I'm sure that the team is prepared to do that. But those are things that we've thought long and hard about. Because we want to make sure that we are not stymieing the process or the progress based on our failures to fully disclose where we are in the process and what these images represent. We heard you when you said we need to see the folks who we're trying to engage around this need something that makes sense and not the technical engineering drawings, but something that people can touch, see, and feel and better understand. So I'm pleased to hear that the team has been able to meet the expectations. We're looking forward to doing the same, as has been shared, Commissioner Hardesty, with the Oregon side. So just so that we don't want for there to be an uneven approach to sharing information, but we can't do it all at the same time. So we will be working on that. Back to you, Greg.
So are there any other questions or concerns about any of the information or material that I presented before we jump into our presentations?
All right, seeing no hands raised, we're going to jump right in. So our agenda has been shared. I just want to go over it one more time with you. We've finished the first portion of the agenda and we need to catch up. So we're going to have an overview of the program work plan. Then we're going to have a community engagement update, which is an extension of what we discussed during last month's meeting. Then we'll have the opportunity for public comment, and we'll confirm upcoming meeting topics, discuss what we've talked about today, and make sure that as we leave this meeting, we're clear about some of the requests and expectations that you've made known to us. So we will move on to the first presentation, which is the program. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me read the meeting ground rules. I recognize I need to make sure that I state those aloud. We as a team are going to honor the agenda. We're going to listen to understand and ask questions to clarify. We're going to be hard on the problems and soft on the people. We will address interests and seek common ground and provide a balance of speaking time. So I am going to ask that John Willis and Alex Prentice turn on their cameras. They're going to be making this presentation. We are a few minutes behind. I don't want to discount the amount of effort that the team has made in getting us to this point in terms of the information that they're going to be sharing, but I am going to encourage them to be as concise as possible so that we can make up some time. John.
Sounds great. Millicent, hi, I'm John Willis, the IBR Deputy Program Manager. I'm here with Alex Prentice, as you mentioned, who is our cross-discipline lead. So our goal today, we will be brisk going through the program, our work plan for getting there. Before I do that, I just wanted to pause and add on to what Administrator Johnson said. As I was gathering the information and thoughts on this morning, I had a swell of gratitude as I was thinking about going into ESG. This is a really broad team. We talked about meeting for 14 months. It's been done remotely. It hasn't been easy, but you all have provided guidance, critique, and direction for our team. And I just really appreciate that, helping us navigate competing interests and complicated technical challenges, and maybe most importantly, interpreting the political realities for us who are engineers and planners. So I just wanted to pause and say thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that this takes a lot of time. So that's a big part of the work plan, and I just wanted to say that out loud. As we closed out 2021, we completed the development of the screening criteria, desired outcomes, the equity and climate frameworks, and the design options, of which Brad just shared a little bit of some of that work from leading up to the end of last month. All of this responding to the environmental, political, and contextual changes since the prior planning efforts. So as we get into 2022, we are really in the evaluation of those options and developing and modifying or refining a modified LPA. That's the work we're going to describe between now and July. And Administrator Johnson promised a data-driven approach. We are now at the ready. You saw some of the design work. You're going to hear more about our community engagement and what we're learning from there. You're about to get a lot of data over the next several months. And Alex is going to jump in to talk a little bit about what's coming our way. So we're really headed towards that draft modified LPA. And I think this spring's version of that, what we share, will be the framework that defines how we move into the next steps, which include NEPA and ultimately design and construction. And we're continuously working with your staff at the staff level group, as well as your project managers, the leaders in your agencies, that project manager level group, to make sure we're producing a multimedia solution that's in accordance with your priorities, the existing infrastructure, policy, and future development plans. And we're also working with the equity and community advisory groups and the broader community to make sure that is folded in. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this, all with the goal of getting to that modified, locally preferred alternative. I'm going to turn it over to Alex right now to provide an overview of the work products that will be shared with you in the coming months, and the advisory groups and the broader community. So with that, Alex, do you want to take over?
Yes, thank you, John. And it's lovely to meet all of you. I've had the pleasure of working with your staff at more the technical level and the task force level in developing this program plan and the different components of it, but it's great to be here as well. So as John said, our goal is to develop this one IBR solution. It's a multimodal solution. And if you look at all of these blue bubbles, the little blue bubbles, that's really what's going to be going into this multimodal solution. We've broken these down into different components, just like Brad showed earlier in the 3D model for the river crossing and the impacts on downtown Vancouver. That is one of the components that we are evaluating now, and we'll be making a technical staff recommendation on in March. In addition to that, we have Hayden Island and Marine Drive as a separate design component. The design team is working on the 3D models for those, and we will share those with you as soon as we have them. We're also working separately on a transit solution evaluation and recommendation based on performance. And what will also have to go into the modified LPA evaluation is the auxiliary lanes and some more information on tolling, both of which John is going to go into in more detail. So for February and March, I just want to give a brief overview of what this means when we say an evaluation and recommendation. This is the technical work that we are doing with your staff and amongst the IBR program team. We are using desired outcomes and your values and priorities to have developed screening criteria, which are now going to be used to evaluate each of these design options and assess impacts. So using those 3D models, that is exactly what we're going to be evaluating. And so there are a bunch of different criteria that address your values and priorities that we're going to be looking at so that the staff at a technical level can be making a data-driven recommendation. A big part of that is focusing on equity and climate goals. Those are highlighted in our screening process. So we'll be including that in these recommendations, as well as the pure data from the community survey results that focused on design options and some of the work that the community working groups focused on these areas did. What these recommendations will not include at this time is EHE, Equity Advisory Group, and Community Advisory Group feedback. We will be asking them for feedback as we present these recommendations. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the interplay between making a recommendation amongst all of the different advisory groups, including you. We have a lot to put together to get to this holistic modified LPA, and we will be asking for your help in making decisions along the way so that we can get this to a final recommendation by the end of July. So this is really important work. This is going to be an iterative process between now and July. There's going to be a lot of going back and forth on different aspects of the design and looking at impacts and looking at priorities and values, looking at future development, land use, equity and climate goals, and making sure that the choices that we're making for each of these components and looking at the holistic program as that goes forward meets all of those priorities and values. I think that's about all for sort of getting to this technical part of our recommendation that's taking place in February, March. It's really important to note that these sort of technical recommendations that we're making, these are only one input into the program going forward. We have a really, really major input in the form of the community advisory group, the equity advisory group, community engagement, and of course, your recommendations and evaluations and feedback. So I'm going to turn this back over to John, who's going to talk a little bit more beyond just the design components and the other aspects that are going into this multimodal solution.
Thanks, Alex. As Alex mentioned, we're looking at very discrete parts of the project, seeing how they perform, sharing that with the advisory groups. It'll be a pretty big swirl between January and March. As we pull it together, there's a couple pieces I wanted to highlight. And not only the advisory groups, but also your staff, I should have mentioned that, are very much a part of that swirl. We're going to be pulling all of this together into a holistic recommendation for the entire program. There's a couple things that happen after we have those discussions on those discrete components. And the first one is a discussion and recommendation on auxiliary lanes. That'll come after the evaluation of the various options because the need and scale of the auxiliary lanes are really an outcome of the safety operations and the geometric design of the project. They are dependent on the design options that we will have worked on before. And we look forward to the discussion of opportunities and trade-offs as that information is finalized in auxiliary lanes. So that'll take a look at the scale and outcome. I mention this because a lot of discussions have happened not only now, but actually over the last dozen years describing the number of lanes on the program. And we really want to make sure that's a robust discussion with all the data that builds up to it. The second piece is tolling. We are using tolling scenarios. Actually, that slide should just say tolling and not tolling recommendation. We'll use tolling scenarios to inform the modified LPA that we're taking into NEPA. And I'm going to describe a little bit of what we're doing on tolling and maybe more importantly, what we're not. What we are doing is starting with the assumption that a variable rate toll will be a component of the locally preferred alternative. And our team is modeling tolling scenarios to help differentiate between design options and to support a broader regional conversation, understanding what those sensitivities are. What it is not, the tolling discussion that we'll be having and culminating in April. Our program will not be making a recommendation on toll rate. There will be a decision external to the program coming much later. We won't know even what the possible range of rates are until we embark on a traffic and revenue study, which begins in earnest this summer and will continue on throughout the next year. I see there's a hand raised, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. I think the question of towing is a vital question, especially if it's going to be, you're looking for decisions around March about how we move forward with that conversation. And I guess my concern is tolling still in my mind only pays for freeways. And so if we don't know how we're going to incorporate multimodal transportation options in this project, I'm concerned that we're going to be stuck with a system that is the same system we always end up stuck with transportation projects. Could you respond to that?
Yes, we're hopeful. I understand your concern, and our team definitely understands your concern. We also know there are decisions made that are outside of the program that occur at both state transportation commissions and even legal questions that are handled at state legislature that are outside the program. Our team is hoping we can provide scenario analysis to help understand the sensitivities. When it comes to the question you have about maybe changing historically what tolls have been used for and how they've been paid or how they've been allocated, I could defer to others on our program team to talk a little bit more, maybe add on to my answer. And I don't know if Administrator Johnson, if you have some thoughts on that.
So if I can jump in on that question, our program in regards to tolling, we will not have the final say. That will come from both the Oregon Transportation Commission and Oregon DOT, as well as the Washington State DOT and the Washington State Transportation Commission. So,
with all due respect, if what we present matters. So if we're under the assumption that these decisions are out of our hands, then you're modeling what you're going to present to the OTC and to others may not be as robust as it could be.
I'm not sure I understand.
So what you're telling me is that the decision makers are outside of our power. We are not the decision makers on what tolling will look like. We are the decision makers on what we propose, however. And if we propose a status quo contract, then we will get a status quo. If we do a status quo tolling program, then that will be what will be considered, as compared to if we believe that these dollars should be used for more than just highways, and that we are actually starting with a plan to make that happen, what we submit would look different. So again, I'm just trying to get a good understanding about, I know who makes what decisions, but I also know that as the commissioner in charge of transportation in my city, I have an obligation to make sure that nothing I'm supporting is going to have a detrimental impact on where we're moving as a community. Does that make sense?
I understand that. I'm not sure what you're asking the program, the IBR program, to do differently.
So what I hear is you're doing modeling on tolling. I want to know what that modeling looks like, and if it's the traditional tolling modeling, or if you've actually expanded your perspective, knowing the conversations we've had over this table over the last year, right? Are you looking at this as an opportunity to actually expand our opportunities around multimodal transit opportunities, or are we just looking at this as a freeway project?
No, we are not. And what for the transit piece is very robust, and the spend on transit that's projected is fully 1/3 of the cost of this program. This is not a ignoring of transit or other modes as well. So
I appreciate that. And I know we share that value, but it just made me nervous when I see that in April, we're going to have a tolling recommendation. And if I don't know how you're coming up with that recommendation, if I don't know that recommendation is really based on new thinking and climate mitigation, then I will be very concerned about what you present to the Oregon Transportation Commission and to the other transit agencies. That's my concern.
Yeah. I'll let Secretary Millar speak. I just want to provide a little bit of clarity. We are going to have the outcome of our tolling scenarios, and I appreciate all the conversation that's been had around this and recognizing what we have the ability to control and what we don't. The reason we're looking at tolling scenarios is to understand the impact of tolling on demand and the mode share that we're talking about on the program. We think that sensitivity analysis will help inform the regional conversation. We could wait until the end of our tolling and revenue study at the end of 2023 to talk about tolling, but we're trying to bring it forward in the areas where we do have some control. And it's really from a technical point of view to answer those questions. I'll turn it over to Secretary Millar, who's had his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. And Greg, to the extent that you can provide an answer to this, approximately what percentage of your budget do you anticipate tolling covering?
So the original, during the CRC days, it was looked at 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So state revenue or local match would be 1/3, federal revenue would be 1/3, and tolling would be 1/3. But now with the infrastructure package being passed, we think that we may have opportunities for a larger amount of federal. We know that the ask of the state dollars has gone up from the previous program due to inflationary costs. So right now, tolling is going to be less than 1/3 of the cost of this bridge, but there's still a gap between those other two sources that has to be closed with tolling dollars.
Yeah, so it's less than 1/3 of the projected revenue. And in Washington state, tolling is constitutionally restricted to highways. I believe that's the case in Oregon as well. So you can only spend that money on the highway portion of the project, but that does not keep the team from using tolling as a tool. Here in Washington state, we use tolling for two things. We use tolling to generate revenue to pay off bonds. We've done that on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. We've done that on the 520 bridge, but on I-405 and 167 up here and on the Puget Sound Gateway project that's under development, we use tolling to manage demand for the highway. And the toll rates are used to reduce the number of people that would otherwise drive on the highway and to provide a financial incentive to take public transportation or to walk or to ride. And my understanding of the tolling analysis that the IBR bridge team is looking at, it's looking at the revenue part of tolling, but it's also looking at the demand management part of tolling and how tolling will move people or not, because again, those aren't decisions that we get to make, move people from a highway mode to a public transportation mode or an active transportation mode to do what they're doing. So I think within the constraints of what our prospective constitutions allow, the team is looking at tolling as a way to encourage more robust use of transit and more robust use of walking and riding. And that economic driver, and there are some really, really aggressive goals that I've heard here. And I have no problem with aggressive goals, but what this recommendation will say is, if you want to move a certain number of people to transit, if you want to move a certain number of people to walking and biking, the toll is going to have to be X. And with that information, we can have a conversation and make some decisions. But I think we'll be getting the information that we need at the modified LPA evaluation stage of this, knowing that there's a lot of decision making that happens in the months and years after the right end of this schedule the team is sharing with us.
I really appreciate that. I see Chair Peterson's hand is up, so I'm going to be really quick. I get a little frustrated that we continue to think very limited. And I will say, just because today our Constitution has a mandate about this issue does not mean that 2 years from now, we would not have been able to change our constitutions in Oregon and Washington to reflect new thinking, new values, new priorities. I know that at the federal level, there is certainly talk about moving away from gas tax revenue to pay for these types of kind of projects. And so I just don't want us to be limited by what we've always done. And if we tell ourselves we have no power to change things, then guess what? We really have no power to change things. If we're actually building for 50 years into the future, this conversation would be going differently.
Commissioner, I agree with you that we need to be thinking differently, and I believe we are. But I'll leave it to President Peterson.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of summarize what I've heard around this conversation and what our council is really supportive of seeing in terms of moving forward. One, I know that Commissioner Hardesty and the Metro Council and my dog all agree that that we are trying to use this in order to pay for improvements within the I-5 corridor, not just the bridge. I think we've talked a lot about how this can't just be to pay for a bridge, but it has to help pay for all of the things that we need within this corridor to the extent that the law allows us to do that. The second part of that is that we are using the variable tolling to manage demand, which we've talked about, and therefore manage demand and reduce greenhouse gas emissions as a result of that. So I just wanted to add my voice to that this isn't just about paying for a bridge, it's about paying for the improvements within the entire corridor. And man, he just decided. So I'll stop there and just give my support, but I do believe that the project is ready to answer those questions for us. Thank you.
So I'd just like to add on that the letter that we received from Metro and City of Portland, we took that letter very seriously, and that's why we are running these models that are looking at making sure that we are not missing anything, whether it's land use, whether it's the maximizing throughput on transit, all of those things. Tolling rates are all being looked at in these models to say, okay, how can we impact demand going through this corridor? So this is being taken very seriously. Our team is putting a lot of time into this effort to get those answers for you. So it's not anything that we are ignoring. It's something that we take serious. And if we can change demand by doing some of these things, we will come back to this group and say, this is what we found. If we can't change demand, on the other hand, we will come back to this group and say, this is what we found. So.
Thank you. And, next time I'll try and get the dog signed up for testimony appropriately. But the third piece of it, I guess, was also the I-5 congestion pricing to the south and the conversations that are going there and building that into the demand management scenario so that we understand what the totality of the system can gain. So thank you.
So I don't know if he's howling approval or criticism, but we are looking at and working hand in hand with the Office of Urban Mobility on the scenarios that they're running both on I-5 and I-205 to make sure we understand how that impacts traffic flows throughout the region. So it's good stuff.
John?
Millicent, do we have any other comments, or I can't see my
it does not appear. So I'll ask that you go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah, we'll wrap up. I was just going to highlight those series of circles that take us from the modified LPA all the way to the bi-state. And I will point out Millicent's been a great guide on helping us think about how we get to a decision. And I just was going to highlight 3 goals before I turn it over to Alex to close. 3 goals that we're looking at as a team to help get to that consensus. The first is that we've been working enough together now, and actually over the last 14 months, that the recommendation recommendations we make are incremental and are focused on conversations like we're having right now, so that we can agree in principle on the issues that matter most and get that feedback along the way. And we recognize we'll be making adjustments. The second goal is we really want this to be another opportunity to demonstrate that this time the project is different and represents a negotiation that benefits stakeholders on both sides of the river in ways that may have eluded us in the past. And our third goal is that as the data comes in, we're hopeful we can get concurrence on eliminating options that are maybe unreasonable, so that we can focus on the ones that are practical, constructible, and fundable. This helps us both from just a cost of the program as well as our schedule here. So I just wanted to point those three things out that we're trying to drive as we get to a decision, and we're in support of the program in doing so. Alex, I think you can maybe provide a quick overview of what our advisory groups and community is doing before we jump into it.
I'm going to go at a very high clip here. I just want to reiterate the importance of our advisory groups in our decision making and in getting to and modified LPA endorsement. So our community advisory group and our equity advisory groups are being brought along at each step of the way. The community advisory group is going to get some high-level feedback on our preliminary staff recommendation for Hayden Island Marine Drive on February 3rd. They are going to evaluate major parts of the design based on their adopted set of values and priorities. That's going to be taking place through February and May, when they will be making a recommendation on the holistic modified LPA. The community advisory group has ranked these design priorities in order of importance, with transit mode being the most important one for them to weigh and discuss. And again, the community advisory group has reviewed their role in the modified LPA process and will give their recommendation on the modified LPA in May for your consideration. The equity advisory group has played a really critical role in developing the screening criteria by which we are evaluating all of these design options. So we are currently applying, while evaluating from a data-driven perspective, all of the equity priorities that have been identified over the past year. We will be using the IBR Equity Index, which identifies equity priority areas, so that we can really home in on those priority areas when we're evaluating impacts and benefits of different design options. The program, similar to the community advisory group, has begun to engage the EAG more in depth on these specific design components. And we're going to be using, for example, the 3D models that Brad showed earlier in all of the different priority areas, all of the different design component areas, so that we can really understand better the equity implications of the different options. And then the equity advisory group also will be making a recommendation to inform the evaluation of these options to help shape the modified LPA. And this is going to also be an iterative process through the spring and inform the overall decision making. I want to be clear that even though we have our green boxes down there that are pointing to when we're actually going to be making a recommendation, that these green boxes should be continuous, because it's an iterative process. It has always been an iterative process with our advisory groups, and they're really going to be feeding into what this modified LPA looks like, even before they make a recommendation. Sorry for my calendar updates. So the community engagement will also have a major role in developing the modified LPA. Due to sort of the shortness of time, I will let the community engagement presentation cover most of that. But just a high-level overview, the past fall, we completed outreach and a community engagement efforts around the design options with the goal of soliciting feedback. We're evaluating all of that data, and it is going into the staff technical recommendations that we'll be making in February, March on each of the design components. The detailed results of those are going to be posted on the website at the end of this month, and will be a tool, again, for understanding priorities and values associated with the design options under consideration. So I will move on from there and let the community engagement team speak more to that. I think that's all for the advisory group interactions.
So Alex, before we leave this slide, I'm going to apologize in advance, because I know that our priorities of information rollout are to get to the executive steering group first and then trickle down information to the other groups. And that's still our priority, our hierarchy of rolling through information that is derived. There will be times, because of the complexity of other things we're doing, that may not be possible, but we will try and make sure that you are informed of any information that's going out to other groups that may hit their group before it hits the executive steering group. So we know that that is a very sensitive point, and we will be trying our best to make sure it doesn't happen. But I know that this is a huge, complex task, and sometimes calendars cannot align with the reality of how information is going out or needs to be shared. So I'll say that and apologize in advance.
Thanks, Administrator Johnson. I see Matt Ransom's hand is raised.
Yeah, just a quick acknowledgement. I thank you for this detail. This is probably the most concise and consumable presentation of schedule that I've seen to date, something that I can use with the RTC Board of Directors. I wanted to acknowledge and say I like the sequence and hoping there's a clear readout from the CAG and the EAG before the RTC Board of Directors takes this issue up this spring. I think when I think about that table, is most would understand an MPO is a very diverse set of stakeholders, from transit to ports to county, cities, et cetera, even our gorge community partners. And I think it's important that we hear a clear readout from those groups. So I'm hoping, and as represented here, the schedule allows for that. And then I think last, what I guess request or hope from the project is a pretty concise packaging of this, recognizing that pieces will come in components, but it's 50, 100 page, some type of readout that is usable by organizations like RTC to really package this. And I think also set in place those decisions that are forthcoming. The topic conversation we just had about tolling, clearly there are processes that are yet to begin and that are going to play out in the years ahead, while recognizing that we're sort of setting in motion components that will be planned concurrent with this project. So I think it's important that as a consumable document that I take forward that this is what we're recommending. These are pieces that are queued up, maybe some sense of schedule, or if not a schedule, at least practitioners that would then have the authoritative role to make those decisions as I say, in the months, years ahead and so forth. But this is good stuff. I look forward to the spring.
Thank you all
so
for the
much.
feedback. Yeah.
I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Just thanking everybody for the feedback. I appreciate it. The team appreciates it.
Well, thank you, John and Alex, for the presentation. I will share that the document that we shared with the ESG members last week was a much more detailed version of this. We rolled up that information to this to make it a bit more digestible, but you do have access to those individual instances during each month that we would have the opportunity to engage different advisory groups and committees that help to support this schedule. So wanted to make sure that we were clear that that has been provided, and will continue to provide you the types of updates and information that you need to be able to best engage your stakeholders. So, Greg, do you have any final comments on this before we move on to the community engagement update?
No, it just the fact that this is a very tight schedule. We have windows that we need to hit for boards and councils. So we will be seeking to keep this schedule viable so we can get to that July timeframe. So there's other important issues that are contingent upon us getting there. So
Thank you so much, Administrator Johnson. Thank you again, John and Alex. Great job. We are going to move on to the community engagement update. We had allocated 40 minutes for this portion of the meeting. I'm going to ask that the team, Audrey Bomar, Jaguar, and Salome Chimuku, be mindful of the time that we have allocated. We would like to end as close to 11:40 as possible. We want to make sure that we're providing the opportunity for the public comment that people have requested to be able to make. So given that some of this information was shared during last month's meeting, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to breeze through some of the content and focus on that which is new, different, and that really helps to inform those outcomes from the survey that was provided to the community last fall. So, Audrey.
Thanks, Melissa, and good morning. My name is Audrey Bomar. I help lead the program's communications and community engagement team. So thank you for allowing us the opportunity to not only present the community feedback and engagement summary today, but also for your continued support and commitment to transparent, authentic, and equitable community engagement. Presenting with me today are my colleagues Salome and Jake. They, along with many others, have had a significant role in both the engagement activities as well as summarizing and analyzing the feedback being presented today. Community engagement efforts seek to provide extensive, inclusive, and ongoing opportunities for meaningful two-way communication with our stakeholders that prioritizes equity, diversity, accessibility, transparency, and inclusion. From October 2021 and into early January, the program held a targeted period of community engagement to gather feedback around design options. A variety of engagement activities were offered, and each activity served a different purpose, helping the program gather different types of feedback, both qualitative and quantitative, from stakeholders and community members. The engagement report, which is in its final stages of completion and scheduled to be posted publicly by the end of this month, goes in depth into the feedback received with detailed analysis, cross-tabbing of the data, and in-depth findings. It summarizes public input received from more than 9,600 survey responses and 1,700 survey comments, community briefings, listening sessions, advisory groups, and written and emailed public comments. The feedback gathered during this engagement period will inform the design option analysis as the program works with stakeholders and agency partners to identify a modified LPA. As you can imagine, and as Millicent noted, we don't have time in this meeting to cover the level of detail you will find in that report. So we'll be highlighting some of the key takeaways and important findings and can answer some questions. We'll follow up later this month with the link to that full report once it's posted. Targeted community engagement around design options was successful in reaching many community members and provided the program with extensive feedback. You saw this slide in front of you last month, so I'll quickly kind of run through the outreach and engagement activities and some updates from last month. We reached over 10,000 people via the online open house, the briefings, listening sessions, the survey, and community working groups, advisory groups, youth journalists, and freight leadership. We provided a specific link to our EAG and CAG members in order to analyze survey data from these advisory groups and identify any data points that differed from the overall results. The survey was originally scheduled to be open from November 12th through December 10th. Initial review of demographic results showed lower participation among Oregon residents and equity priority communities. We quickly reopened the survey and began targeted engagement to equity priority communities and Oregon CBOs. This effort produced only a minimal amount of additional survey responses, but we did succeed in gathering responses from a more diverse population. We will get into the demographic details in a little bit. Next slide. Engagement opportunities were advertised via traditional media outreach, newspaper, radio, transit, social media ads, direct mail postcards, in-person canvassing. our monthly newsletter and email alerts, and by direct phone and email to program partners and CBOs. Advertisements were also disseminated in Spanish and Vietnamese to associated media outlets. We included a question at the beginning of the survey asking participants to share how they heard about the survey, and 72% of survey participants heard via social media. So we consider that one of our most effective ways of communicating with the community. Before we dig into the feedback, I want to quickly note our approach to gathering broad input and on this pretty technical information. Design option information we heard from the community, it was dense. There was a lot to cover, and in some cases it was very preliminary, making it difficult to share broadly with the community in a meaningful way. For this reason, we crafted our survey questions and structured our discussions with a focus on individual priorities and preferences for design attributes associated with the designs, rather than focusing on the specific designs themselves. We also asked for travel pattern and user information to help us understand travel behaviors. This method of engagement allows the technical team and decision makers to apply the values and priorities expressed by the community to the design options once the data analysis and modeling is complete, and understand which design options include attributes that align with community values and priorities. Community feedback is one of several important inputs into this decision-making process and will be considered alongside detailed technical data analysis, screening results, modeling information, and partner and stakeholder input. I'm going to turn it over to Salome, and she's going to get into some of the design option feedback and our equity focused engagement activities.
Hello, everyone. Salome here, she, her pronouns. And so I'm going to go over the design options feedback and our overall takeaways. And so a lot of the information that I'm going to go over is just confirms a preference for design options that improve travel times, relieve congestion, improve safety, and mitigate negative impacts to people and the environment. We collected a lot of this feedback from the survey, and it really, I guess you could say, goes a little bit deeper than the things that we've heard before and just kind of puts it into clarity. And so here we had many express desire to find a solution and to build it already. There was a desire to both relieve congestion and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of the feedback talked about trip time, ease of trip, and avoiding toll as the most influential factors when choosing how to travel across the interstate bridge in the future. And there was considerable feedback and a desire to understand benefits and trade-offs of each design option more clearly. And in some of the anecdotal instances, it was specifically people asking questions like, which option would be best for transit? And then lastly, a lot of concern around costs and tolling of the project and the program. Next slide, please. So in the program, we definitely center equity in how we do engagement. So on the slide here, you can see the different equity priority engagement tactics that we used. We really focused on accessibility and conducted an ADA user testing of the survey, as well as making sure that documents that were sent out for listening sessions and community briefings were mediated before being emailed out to participants. We also translated the survey in online open house. Folks who are non-native English speakers could get this information in a language they felt more comfortable in, as well as making sure that we had translation and interpretation available at our listening sessions. We partnered with our community-based organizations that received miniature grants from us. There's a total of 11 CBOs who distributed listening and session information and survey information through their networks via email blasts, social media posts, and newsletter articles. And one even posted in their WhatsApp channel with their members. We also extended the survey deadline for multiple reasons. One being that we felt that the survey demographics that we had collected thus far did not fully represent the overall community demographics. We also heard that certain communities needed more time to understand, digest, and provide feedback on information. A lot of the folks that came to listening sessions felt that that really helped prepare them to do the survey, and also just recognizing that when the survey went live, we need to make sure that the folks who were accessing the survey through non-English felt that the information was translated appropriately and that they understood what was being asked of them and what was being presented to them. We refined the survey and outreach materials to meet the needs of people living with disabilities who use screen readers and other visual aids. And we also provided additional time for multilingual participants, as I said, to take the survey. We also noticed that direct engagement through the CBO partners and advisory group members and listening sessions participants were needed to make sure that we were getting ample feedback from both sides of the river. Next slide, please. So here's a bit of the engagement feedback that we heard while in these listening sessions. The listening sessions were a total of 4, and within our BIPOC listening session, a lot of participants reported using transit as their means of getting across the bridge, as well as carpool. There were very few folks in those rooms that were single occupancy using vehicles. A lot of folks expressed the reduction in trip frequency due to job loss. So when asked about their travel patterns, a lot of them had a follow-up question of, are you asking pre-COVID or during COVID? Recognizing that job loss or wage loss has limited their trips across the river. And then a lot of the folks said and felt in that session that they needed continued engagement in these affinity spaces, saying that they felt more comfortable to answer questions, to hear the presentation when they knew that people in the room come from a similar background as they do. With our people living with disability session, there's a high interest in accessibility and dependability of transit options. There was concern over funding of the project and the project cost. Not necessarily that we would be over budget, but that we were not spending money and making sure the bridge would be accessible to community members. And so there was questions around what kind of investments have we made thus far as a program to make sure that accessibility concerns were heard and addressed. And then lastly, there was concern around construction, signage, and notices along with signs on the new bridge. Next slide, please. So here you have the youth and people living with lower income. And just for clarity's sake, the reason why these two groups were together is because the CBO partners that worked on this session had a wider range of who they work with. And so we wanted to make sure that people knew that it wasn't just youth or just people living with lower income, but actually a blend. And so there was a strong environmental impact concerns, and there was also support for infrastructure that promotes high capacity transit and low stress active transportation options. And then with our limited English proficiency and immigrant and refugees, we heard a lot of concern around tolling in particular and how it would be implemented equitably. We heard concerns around safety and congestion relief of the top priorities, a desire to dedicate lanes for freight or for transit, and then support for active transportation through high capacity transit. And it was interesting enough in this group, we also heard that folks had a preference for a stacked bridge alignment option, mostly due to safety reasons. Lastly, here you see the breakdown of participants through the listening sessions and also the community working groups. As you can see here, you get the total number of participants at the bottom in bold for all the sessions combined, but you also see a breakdown of how many people were coming to each of these meetings. And so as you notice the listening sessions, you'll see These numbers add up to a total of 307 total participants, but please keep in mind that a lot of these participants shared their screen with another individual. So we had situations where there was 4 people to 1 screen. So it's that 307 is the least amount of people that we had, probably more. But due to not being able to capture those folks who were sharing screens with others, we just felt comfortable just to count the number of screens. And if our community working group, you can see here the breakdown of diversity among our participants. And as you can see, these sessions were a little bit smaller than our listening sessions for the public. Next slide, please. And so here are our survey demographics. As you can see on this slide here, we had about 57% of folks from Washington and 43% from Oregon in terms of our survey respondents. We had a large amount of participants with a higher income, as well as a large amount of participants identifying as white. And again, that's why we extended the survey, as well as did our listening sessions to make sure that we were hearing from a more reflective amount of community members. And as you can see with age, there was a nice spread across all different age groups. And with our survey demographics, we do keep in mind that we asked some of the same survey questions within our listening sessions to capture those folks' opinions and thoughts, recognizing that not everyone finds surveys to be accessible or how they want to express themselves. And I'm going to pass it over to Jake.
Thanks, Salome. And hi, everybody. I know we're short on time for this section, so I'll go pretty quickly. We did ask where folks came from in the survey, and we just asked what city. And so provided a quick and dirty heat map here. Not a lot of surprises that Vancouver and Portland residents were the vast majority of survey takers. But we did have representation from a lot of other places in the region. So we wanted to just look at see what that looks like and provide that for you. Next slide. So we dug into how different folks responded to certain questions by demographics to really get at if there were some differences. And so we compared responses based on what state folks lived in, and some key differences we found. The Oregon residents who responded tended to report walking more, taking transit more, and biking more. But all respondents reported primarily driving, or the vast majority do drive to get around. Next slide, please. One thing that really came out through this survey that I want to highlight is when we asked how often people drive across the bridge, we found a higher percentage of folks who identified with a race or ethnicity besides white, or in addition to white or Caucasian. The non-white respondents really reported more frequently traveling across the bridge. So that 53% that's listed there, 53% of our BIPOC survey respondents reported traveling across the bridge either daily or a few times a week. That's compared to closer to 40% for the white respondents. So just something that really kind of drives home a point that we've suspected. It provides further data that we've seen a trend in our region of folks of color being pushed to further areas of the region, being pushed north of the river, or seeking out more affordable housing north of the Columbia River, but still relying on services, jobs, et cetera, in Multnomah County. And so there's that piece that I think this speaks to. We also suspect that related to COVID, as people were answering this question in the context of this pandemic, there might be some explanation there of we know that BIPOC individuals tend to be disproportionately needing to work still in a location and not be able to work from home. That might have contributed to this, but just something that we really found was a poignant data piece to point out. Next slide. Then we asked why people take transit for those who ride transit. Pretty similar when comparing white respondents and non-white respondents. However, one that stands out is getting to or from work or school. Non-white respondents were much more likely to use transit with so a much more kind of essential purpose to get to and from employment. That also might speak to the point on the previous slide about more regular travel across the bridge. Next slide. So I'm going to pass it back to Audrey to go through our key takeaways across the different design option elements that we asked about.
Thanks, Jake and Salome. When sharing information about river crossing design options, we showed cross sections of possible configurations for a stacked bridge and a cross section of a 2-bridge single level, like you saw earlier in this presentation. We were able to show high-level attributes for these configurations, including, generally speaking, differences between height and width, location of vehicle traffic, the multi-use path, and the transit path. This level of information was presented in many of the engagement opportunities detailed earlier and in the survey. On screen, you can see a summary of the key takeaways related to the river crossing design options. And these are a summary of all of the engagement activities, what we heard in those. So most important consideration for survey respondents is improved travel times for vehicles and freight. There was support expressed for the stacked alignment, but concern with that configuration around possible removal of connections to downtown Vancouver. Safety, noise, and exhaust are concerns for shared use path users, and interest in logistical and design considerations for high, wide, and heavy freight. And then we heard suggestions for a third crossing and/or express lanes needed, and continued interest from the community and other alternatives for crossing the river. Next slide. In the survey, we asked 2 questions about the river crossing design options. As shown on the slide, we first asked, when considering a replacement crossing, what do you care most about? Followed by 10 options, 10 priorities. 72% of respondents identified improved travel times as a top priority, followed by minimizing impacts to the natural environment at 46%. Oregon residents and youth placed a higher priority on minimizing impacts to the environment than the overall average at 54 and 56 respectively. Respondents from Washington placed a higher priority on improving travel time at 78% and a lower priority on environmental impacts at 40%. Our program advisory groups, as I mentioned earlier, were given a separate link to be able to provide, to take the survey so we could analyze their data. And this is one of the spaces where we saw a difference than the overall results, in that program advisory groups were the only demographic that placed improving traveler safety as their top priority. A second question specific to active, oh, sorry, Mil.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention, we only have about 15 more minutes slated for this meeting. You have about 8 more slides, and we still have to get to community input. So I'd like to ask that we somehow figure out how to skinny this up a little bit, and provide the opportunity for ESG members to ask questions.
And if I could help, I just want to say, I've read all these slides, so reading the slides to me are not helpful in these meetings. That's why we get them in advance, so that we know what we're going to have a conversation about. So hopefully we can arrange it so that this is really a more productive process rather than just talking to us.
I will do my best to run through the slides and skip anything that is already on screen. So I will add just one more piece of data that is not on this slide regarding the river crossing. We did ask a specific question for active transportation user priorities, and more than half of respondents reported that they do not bike, walk, or roll across the bridge and didn't have any preferences. But of those who did have a preference, most favored an open path with views of the Columbia River that is at a different level than vehicle traffic. Next slide. Vancouver Interchanges, while there are a few variations among the designs for Vancouver Interchanges, we use this survey opportunity to engage and events to engage on priorities associated with this area of the program. I won't read through the key takeaways to try to speed this up. Let's go to the next slide. With the survey response, I'll just call out improving safety was the top priority for this area of the program, but the second highest priority for youth survey participants was minimizing environmental impacts at 48%, which was compared to older participants at 34%. So that's something that is not shown on this slide. Next slide, please. The Hayden Island Marine Drives throughout the engagement effort, we really only offered the opportunity to provide specific like feedback on the specific design options in the community working group process, and more specifically through a live pulse poll in the meeting at the Hayden Island Marine Drive Community Working Group. Because of the format for these groups, they were able to spend the additional time with IBR technical staff and partner agency staff reviewing the designs and going into detail for a deeper understanding. During a pulse poll at the Hayden Island Marine Drive Community Working Group, we did hear participants desire more information and detailed maps for the interchange options, but overall support at that moment in time a full interchange option. And 91% of the Hayden Island Marine Drive Community Working Group participants did not support a no interchange option. We also received feedback from our freight leadership meeting on the Hayden Island Marine Drive, and in general, there was support expressed for improvements to the interchanges in this area, more information about data and traffic projections for the wider freight community. I'm gonna see if I skip through what is on screen here, and we'll go to the next slide. The questions around Hayden Island first asked, what's your preference for how to access Hayden Island? Describing those differences between direct and using an arterial bridge. There was a difference between Oregon and Washington preferences. Respondents from Washington prefer direct access to and from Hayden Island, regardless of the direction they're traveling, more so than Oregon respondents. So 39% versus 25%. And conversely, Oregon respondents prefer access to Hayden Island via the Marine Drive and a new arterial bridge that connects Hayden Island to North Portland. After we asked a question about how to access Marine Drive, we asked for what their preference was, what they care most about when accessing Hayden Island. And as you can see on the screen here, congestion relief on Interstate 5 near Hayden Island was a top priority. The top four were consistent among all groups, Oregon, Washington, and all of those equity priority groups we noted earlier, except for the fourth priority for Oregon respondents was local road connectivity between North Portland neighborhoods and Hayden Island, but the first three were the priorities listed for all groups. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Salome and she can zip through the last few slides here.
All right, so high capacity transit. The key takeaways here, as you can see on your screen, are comments that express strong options for both and against high capacity transit on the Interstate Bridge. I will note that most of our support came from a lot of our equity priority centered communities, which makes sense because they're the ones, as far as our data can show, use the bridge more often and more frequently. We also know that the survey results prioritized the need for fast, reliable, and safe transit. To put this into context, that's not on the screen here. A lot of the folks, predominantly those in the listening session where we were able to ask follow-up questions, said that they would see their use of the bridge go up, as well as use of transit go up if transit was something that made their trip shorter, easier, and avoided tolls. So a lot of support around high capacity transit for the purpose of travel time reliability, if we're able to pull it off. Next slide, please. So here you can see in the high capacity transit, when we asked what was most important, travel time came up time and time again, along with level of service. And again, some anecdotal information for this to supplement this slide is a lot of folks talked about transit being not only reliable, but also very interested in where the stops would be located and what kind of transit would go where. A lot of folks mentioned that they have avoided certain jobs or applying for certain jobs because they realized they couldn't get there via transit. Others stated that not only do they use the bridge for work purposes, such as getting to and from their job, but also school and building community. A lot of folks in our equity party sessions talked about the bridge being a bridge for community as well as a physical bridge. And so when it came to high capacity transit, a lot of folks really were concerned about where the stop's going to be, their travel time, and the reliability and safety of the high capacity transit. Next slide, please. Other key feedback that we received was a lot around tolling. Again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks wondered how we can do tolling accessibly. A lot of folks also were very receptive when we talked about the different ways in which tolling can occur, and also heard each other when others express concern around privacy, when it comes to how we would be able to give folks vouchers or exemptions for the tolling. Other folks liked the fact that, you know, if we were able to use high capacity transit, that doing and using transit would avoid a toll. Other folks who are small business owners within these sessions really talked about how tolling can be really impactful on their business. Some of that being Lyft and Uber drivers, and others being delivery services, wondering how that would impact their business and who pays for those bills. Other concerns talked about number of lanes, especially when it came to the conversation around environmental impact, and what kind of lanes and for what purpose. And then lastly, concerns around potential impacts to residents, businesses, and neighborhoods. Obviously, a lot of folks, especially in our equity priority communities, really were concerned about the idea of displacement during construction and the finished product of the bridge, as well as disruption to business and residences that live in the area via noise and congestion. In our next steps, we are going to make sure that we have our comprehensive engagement report posted to the website for all of you to see, to go into more depth about the information that was presented today. We also are going to make sure that we present this information to our different advisory groups outside of the ESG. And then also we'll be giving feedback will be considered in our decision-making processes to identify a modified LPA. And so a lot of that's going to be talking about the feedback we got through these through the listening sessions, our equity analysis, traffic modeling, and so forth. And lastly, we'll continue engagement and outreach as the program works towards design solutions. A lot of this is due to the fact that in our listening sessions, overwhelmingly, people talked about how they really appreciated getting what they see to be seasonal updates about where the program is at. So that way they could absorb all the rich technical information that we're giving them before we actually try to engage them in survey work and that kind of stuff. So we are definitely planning to do continued engagement and outreach as we move forward. And that is it for our section. I will turn it over to Millicent.
Thanks, Salome. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Jake. I would like to say much more about the amount of work and effort that the team put in, but do want to say thank you for your efforts. If there are questions that folks have that are burning, I would, yes, ask that you raise your hand. Sean.
Yeah, I guess just a general comment. I do appreciate the amount of energy that was put into sort of gathering the data for the survey. The one question I would have very specifically related to the transit portion is on the majority of the 30 plus slides that exist, there's a very specific data metric tied to a comment that's made or something within the surveys that were identified either in a percentage point or the number of individuals that were involved in the survey. But there's two comments on page 31 that don't really have any associated metrics to them. And I'm curious to know the second bullet, those who express support for high capacity transit generally prefer light rail, and overall community working groups were supportive of high capacity transit options, with many preferring light rail or combined BRT, LRT options. And I do appreciate those comments, but my question is that was not specifically asked as a question as a function of the 9,600 responses on the survey. So what constitutes generally and what constitutes many? I guess that's something you can get with me offline about, but I would like to know what the percentage of what you deem generally is and what the percentage of what you deem many is. And that's it. Other than that, I think the presentation was great. I appreciate all the work that was put into it. I know there was a lot of effort put into this, and I do appreciate a lot of the outcomes that came from it. So you can definitely get with me offline about that. I just have those questions about, is that a general statement based on community advisory conversations, or is there an actual metric tied to those two very specific words that I think were put into the presentation? And we can chat about it later offline. I know we got some other stuff we got to get to.
Thank you, Sean. I see Commissioner Hardesty's hand, and I'm assuming, Salome, you might want to respond to what Sean just raised. But Commissioner Hardesty?
If Salome wants to respond now, I'm fine with that.
I can actually respond to Sean's comment. It's a combination of analyzing qualitative data, such as comments and conversations, but it does have some quantitative analysis done. We received, as part of the survey, we did have an open-ended comment section at the very end, and we received 1,700 comments via the survey through that question. And then we also receive a number of comments via email and through our online comment form, generally on the website. All of those comments were taken and tagged and coded. And actually, of the 1,700 comments, more than half of them were regarding transit. And then we even, coded them for, their expression of positive or negative attributes. So yes, we can dig in a little bit deeper offline about some of the data that went into those statements, but we do absolutely have some more of that.
No, I appreciate that. And I just think for context purposes, that's going to be important when we're trying to tell the story about the mode that we choose, how that support came from the community. So I definitely appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Commissioner?
Thank you. A quick just kind of observation. I appreciate getting materials in advance because maybe it's just me, but I actually read everything that I get. And so when I come to these meetings, I actually expect to be engaged in conversation. And it kind of feels like these meetings are not for that purpose, right? So I don't know what my question is, except it is not helpful for me for people to read information at me that they've already sent to me to read ahead of time. So how do we make sure that these meetings are meaningful? I would have loved to have had conversations around the survey information and the interviews. I mean, a couple of things struck me very like in my face. So if we're talking about building a transportation system for the future, and 90% of the people we talk to actually drive most of the places they go, then I don't think that we're having a robust conversation that will inform us as we build a system that is climate resilient for the future. I also was very concerned about how overrepresented some populations were as compared to others, and wanted to ask, how are we making sure that we are going to communities and actually getting them versus the governmental traditional process, which is we're going to have a stakeholders meeting or we're going to have a community meeting. Come join us, right? So I am concerned that based on what I see, I don't feel like I have a full, I would have liked to have had a conversation around this and then figure out kind of what information is missing and what groups should we go to and have our own intentional conversations with. So that's just the feedback from this meeting today. Thank you. And great work. I believe I don't want anything that I just said to take away from what I know is really great work from the community engagement team, right? I just, for me, need to actually be able to engage with you in our community engagement work so that I can know how I can be most helpful and then how we can amplify the work that you're doing, right? So a couple of those slides just struck me very in my face. And I don't want us to think that we actually now have we know what people want, because we don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
So if I
Salome?
can jump in real quick and offer to any of the ESG members one-on-one discussions about this survey and what we found, we'd be more than happy to do that. We have a public audience that is listening to this, and that's why we sometimes go into more in-depth conversations about what we're finding, because there is a broader audience. So, but understood.
Yeah, so just trying to figure out what that balance is. I appreciate that, right? But I think the reason you're talking to the executive committee because you want us to weigh in, right? This is not just a one-way communication opportunity, right?
Agreed.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Yes, I am taking your recommendations under advisement and will work to ensure that the future management of these meetings reflects the need to both be concise in the way that we message the information, but that it also provides the opportunity for the interface and exchange of ideas, thoughts, and opinions that are critical to help us to move forward. So Salome, unless this is super urgent, I'm going to ask that we, thank you, that we move on to the opportunity for public input. Thanks again, everyone, for your work. Very quickly read the instructions to ensure that folks who have other needs as it relates to hearing instructions or listening to those instructions have the opportunity to hear what they are. So to make a verbal comment, if you've joined by Zoom, we ask that you click raise hand. If you've joined by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. The facilitator will call on participants. You will receive an unmute request. Please accept it. If you are commenting by phone, dial *6 to unmute. Please provide your name and affiliation. Attendees will be allocated up to 2 minutes for public comment, depending on the number of commenters, up to a total of 10 minutes. If we run out of time and you do not have a chance to speak, you will still be able to provide comments after the meeting. To submit comments after the meeting, you fill out a comment form on program website or email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line. Call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message as an alternative. And then all written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to ESG members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. So the next meeting will be in February. That's when those comments would be provided if you did not meet that 48-hour threshold. All comments are posted on the IVR website. So we did have several people who've indicated they'd like to make public comment. Brent, could you please cue those commenters?
Yeah, first we have Dave Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
Hello, I'm Dave Rowe. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I live in Battleground and I work in Lake Oswego. It is a mistake not to include regional passenger rail and freight rail improvements to the IBR program study. In 30 years, the citizens will see and feel this mistake. ODOT made the same mistake in 1960s. Millions of taxpayer dollars were wasted on the failed 4.5-mile Mount Hood Freeway project. The 16-mile long max rail line was built for 1/4 of the cost of the 4.5-mile Mount Hood Freeway. Please include rail in the IBR study. The solution must be multi-transit development. Thank you.
And next we have Joseph Courtwright. Joseph, you available?
For the record, Joe Courtwright, I'm with No More Freeways. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I just want to suggest that we look back on the reasons why the Columbia River Crossing project failed. It failed because, in the word of the day, there were no robust conversations about how much the project would cost and who would pay for it and what the level of tolls would be. And what we're seeing from the IBR project is essentially a scene-for-scene remake of the epic failure of the Columbia River Crossing. First, and I'm going to touch on three things: traffic projections, the financial plan, and tolls. First, on traffic projections. The project has still not released any new traffic projections. The projections from the Columbia River Crossing project are now based on data that is more than 15 years old. And you don't plan to see any projections until April. So essentially, they're moving forward in this project with extremely outdated information, and they specifically disobeyed Governor Brown's order more than 2 years ago that the first step in this project would be developing new projections. Second, in none of your ESG meetings have you discussed the financial plan for this project. The project released a very preliminary financial plan saying it could cost as much as $4.8 billion. That's $4.8 billion, almost $5 billion. And that there was a $2 or $3 billion hole in that financial plan. And they haven't discussed how they're going to close that. You need to have a serious discussion of financing. You can't talk about that without talking about tolls. The CRC project said that the tolls would be $5 to $6.50 on a round trip basis, a minimum $5 toll for a round trip. And you need to be talking in your public outreach material about whether people are interested in paying upwards of $140 a month to cross the bridge each way on a commuting basis. And then finally, you've put off doing the investment grade analysis. And that's important because between the FEIS and the investment grade analysis, the minimum toll level was doubled from $1.30 to $2.60. So stop using the word robust and start being robust by being honest with how much this project will cost, how it will be paid for, and what the level of tolls will be.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Next, we have Sean Philbrook. Sean, are you available? Sean, unfortunately, we're not hearing you right now. Next, we have, and I'm sorry for the name, Yukian Halloran Steiner.
Yes, hello, it's Yukaya, actually.
Yukaya, sorry about that.
No worries. All right, hello, my name is Yukaya Halloran Steiner, and I'm speaking on behalf of Sunrise PDX. I am 16 years old, and I am afraid to grow up. In the past few years, I've seen my home burn around me. Climate change is here, and the destruction of our planet is speeding towards me and towards us. Fires ravaged through ag lands, forests and towns, floods and storms wrecked homes, and here in Oregon, people died in the heat wave this summer. If you've read the news at all in the past 6 months, I think you have an idea of what I'm referring to, and we cannot keep doing what we have always done. From the plans that I have seen on your website, I've only seen options with an addition of lanes for cars. And if we're truly going to meet our carbon emission goals, this bridge cannot be an expansion, addition, or widening of lanes. And I'm here to ask you all to open your eyes. 40% of Oregon's counted emissions come from transportation, majorly worsening the climate crisis. With all that we know about induced demand and lane additions, how on earth could you propose a project that increases capacity for more cars? No, we're not going to make every car emission-free in the next 8 years, so cars pollute. I'm sure you all are familiar with Sunrise PDX's Youth vs. ODOT campaign. The idea is every other week for the past 9 months, we've been rallying outside ODOT asking our leaders, which side are you on? Will you choose to fund, support, and fight for the youth, or will you choose ODOT? And we actually asked Program Administrator Johnson if he would attend one of those rallies, and he declined. And by declining, it's clear which side he and this project are on. So I'll ask you all today, which side are you on? Will you come to one of your rallies? I will note that the invitation is still open, Mr. Johnson. You're always welcome to take us up on the offer. And will you listen to the youth so that we can learn together? Will you support us as we fight for a livable future? Or are you going to expand this freeway and this bridge? Which side are you on? We'll be watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Ukiah. Next, we have Bob Ortblad.
Yes, thank you. I'm Bob Ortblad, a Washington resident and 50 years a civil engineer. I teach the history of infrastructure at the University of Washington. In the last 18 months, the IBR has spent $30 million to manufacture consent for unsafe bridge options. The extremely steep 4% grades combined with Columbia's wind, rain, and black ice will make this bridge the most dangerous interstate bridge in the country. The IBR has also assured us the new bridge will be earthquake-proof, but at what cost? The San Francisco Bay Bridge cost $6.5 billion, $5 billion over budget, and 10 years late. Like the Lake Washington floating bridges, buoyancy gives an immersed tunnel almost earthquake immunity. Unfortunately, the bridge engineers at the IBR have spent over $100,000 for an immersed tunnel assessment prepared by WSP. This report is worthless because it evaluated an immersed tunnel under the wrong barge channel. This report should be retracted and its fees refunded. The IBR has recently posted 3 lies about an immersed tunnel on both its Twitter and Facebook account. Lie number 1, a tunnel will eliminate connections to Hayden Island and Vancouver. At the riverbank, a tunnel, it's much easier to come up from a minus 20 feet at the riverbank for a tunnel than to come down from 100 feet for a bridge. I have been to the world's most beautiful cities. Hong Kong, Sydney, Gothenburg, all protected their waterfronts by building multiple immersed tunnels. Line number 2, a tunnel will cost more than a bridge. Both British Columbia and Denmark have recently evaluated immersed tunnels versus bridges. Both have found a tunnel to be cheaper and greener. Line number 3, a tunnel comes with significant more environmental impact. To come down 100 feet from a bridge will require massive interchange on both sides of both Hayden Island and Vancouver, both costing about $500 million. A tunnel can connect to existing interchanges.
Bob, thank you for your time, but we're a little bit over here. We have one more person.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Sean Philbrook.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for your time. I'll be brief. Sean Philbrook, VP of Programs for the Business Leaders Group, Identity Clark County. Today, I'm here to present for the record the 2022 Clark County Transportation Alliance Policy Statement. This document brings together disparate regional agendas and advances a unified voice for critical transportation and infrastructure priorities. I'm pleased to share that the 2022 statement has a record 60 plus endorsing organizations, including key cities, ports, school districts, labor groups, healthcare organizations, and local and statewide business associations in both Oregon and Washington. Identified as the top transportation priority for the metro area on this document, these 60 plus organizations offer their undivided support for the replacement of the I-5 bridge. The Transportation Alliance applauds the work done thus far to restart and advance conversations through a bipartisan, bicameral, and bi-state approach. I hope you each receive this testimony as an encouragement to keep up the good work as we endeavor to make necessary facility improvements to the West Coast's economic backbone and one of our region's most significant freight, commerce, and commuter corridors. You should each receive an electronic copy of that policy statement for your reference shortly. Thanks so much.
And Millicent, I just want to recognize for the rest of the ESG members, we did have someone who had issues with connecting today, and they did reach out. We have their name, phone number, and email, and program staff will be following up that person, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you so much. And if he did have written testimony, we will be making sure that the committee members get that information as well. ESG members get that information as well. So thank you so much to those who took time out of their schedules to provide the public comment. Certainly important for us to hear the different perspectives of those who are a part of this community and want to see the future of the community well served. So As we have reached the end of our meeting, I apologize for having gone over. We're 15 minutes past 12, but I hope that you found the conversations that we started today, the discussions that we had, to be meaningful. I can commit to you that we will make sure that going forward, we provide ample opportunity for engagement on each of the issues that we will bring to the group for discussion. And as it relates specifically to the community engagement survey and the data that we found there, I believe it would be time well spent for us to, at the beginning of next month's meeting, which will be on February 17th, to spend some time having the opportunity to dig deeply and to ask some questions and to get additional insights. So I indicated that we would talk about what's going to be on next month's agenda. One of the things that was scheduled to be on this month's agenda was the equity in transit conversation. We are going to be prepared to have that conversation in February, and I'm looking forward to providing you information in advance of that conversation so that we're all ready to have that conversation as well. We also look forward to, and we've talked about it a couple of times now, having the economic impact assessment conversation and presentation. We want to make sure that when we have that presentation, that it is accompanied with all of the attending information and analysis that would make the conversation meaningful. So to the extent that we are able to have that as a part of our conversation, we will do that. We'll have an update on where we are on the schedule, and we will also begin the conversation about how we can make sure we're providing the opportunities for this body to make decisions. We recognize that having one meeting a month might not be sufficient as we approach the really critical deadlines. And so I will be putting some asks out about identifying additional times. I know no one has any additional time, but we may need to impose upon your calendars to ask that you commit at least another hour, hour and a half in both February and March for conversations about critical pieces of the potential IBR solution. So those are the things that I'd like to share as we close, and then I'm going to turn it over to our program administrator, Greg Johnson, for final comments.
I would just like to thank everybody. This is once again an intense amount of information that we are bringing to you, and we will seek to be more streamlined going into the future. But we do have a lot of information to share and bring forward. So thank you for your attention and participation. And I wish everyone to have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. So
see you all next month. Thank you so much. Meeting is adjourned at 12:19 p.m. January 2020. January 20th, 2022. I wish it were 2020.